You're tuned into Radio Pacific.
Well, the deadly Los Angeles wildfires could be the most expensive in U.S. history.
There could be another rate hike on the way for home insurance here in California.
Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency to fast-track wildfire prevention. The emergency order clears the way for controlled burns.
Earlier this year, the Los Angeles fires devastated the city. With a warming climate and a century of full suppression fire policy, experts agree that California is primed to continue burning. But there is now an emerging consensus that fire actually plays a vital role in California ecosystems. Today we reflect on LA and talk with an Indigenous practitioner who argues we do in fact need to fight fire with fire. I'm Eli Cohen, and this is the second episode of Radio Pacific. On the morning of January 7th, a high-pressure system had moved into the Great Basin, and winds coming down the Santa Monica and San Gabriel mountains were already picking up speed. Los Angeles was once again facing the Santa Ana winds. The National Weather Service issued a critical fire weather warning for the city, and the governor had already assigned additional fire trucks and helicopters to the area.
Just to give you guys a heads up, I've notified our dispatch center as well. Currently, it's a 10-acre brush fire and heavy fuel on top of a ridge line. It is 100% in alignment with the wind. It is pushing directly towards Palisades, and this thing's got a wide path of travel already. This thing is going to make a good run.
But when the blaze was first spotted at approximately 10:30 in the morning near a popular hiking trail, none of that preparation really seemed to matter.
Copy. Fire starting to push more westerly. Do you have an update on potential size?
I'm sorry, update on what, sir?
Amount of area involved. Acres.
Yeah, I'm going to guess at least right now we're at 200 easy.
Fueled by the blistering Santa Ana winds, the fire began tearing toward the ocean, the Pacific Palisades, directly in its path.
Yeah, ops from Zulu. We've got multiple homes burning, free burning. I'm not sure who.
Palisades IC from Engine 71. You've got gridlock on Palisades Drive. People are driving down both sides.
Yeah, Alpha from operations. We're going to be evacuating approximately 100 people in your division. We've got a report of 2 individuals trapped at 1-6.
People inside of a pool.
Unable to contain the blaze, firefighters got everyone out of harm's way as quickly as possible.
Reported brush fire, 67s, Mulholland crosses stunned. Repeating, reported
And
brush
then
fire,
blazes began
67s,
igniting
Mulholland.
all over the city.
Reported brush fire, 156s. This is now the Gulch incident. Command will be on. This is now the Zelda incident. Command will be reported brush fire, 58. This is now the Henry incident. This is now the King incident. This is now the Eaton incident. Be on LA County V3, primary attack V8 direct, secondary attack V12 direct, air to ground.
Operations Red Zone 2 on V1.
The city was beyond capacity.
Yeah, I'm located on Radcliffe. I've been asking for resources. The houses are so close together that they're just moving, jumping from house to house. So don't know what you got, but if you got somebody, it'd be nice to get some assistance over here.
Yeah, Red Zone 2, copy that. All resources are assigned at this time.
Seemingly everything that could have gone wrong did.
Yeah, Operations Helco, we're going to be grounding all aircraft. Based on the wind conditions right now, we're ineffective. You have no aircraft on the incident right now.
The winds grounded the planes.
All resources, non-engaged in Division Sarah. I need you to come to 195. I'm going to remain.
Communications kept failing.
195.
And then...
Copy
Copy. Hey, update on our status. We ran out of water in the area of Viacrest.
Copy. We're out of water in the area.
Yeah, are you getting reports of no water pressure up in the area of Lackman Drive and Tellium?
The fire hydrants ran dry.
Yes, we are, and we are working on it.
These recordings are just from the first 12 hours of January 7th. It would take over 3 weeks to fully contain the blazes. In that time, over 16,000 structures were lost, with an estimated $50 billion in damages, and 30 people were killed. In the time since the Los Angeles fires, Governor Gavin Newsom has made multiple moves to increase fire preparedness. He's mandated new fire maps across the state, along with increasingly stringent building codes, especially within the first 5 feet around a home. In order to speed up fuels reduction efforts, such as prescribed burning, he suspended 2 key environmental regulations, CEQA and the Coastal Act. He also wants to spend $1.5 billion from the state's climate fund on firefighting. But one development that hasn't been publicized as much is a first-of-its-kind agreement between the state of California and the Karuk tribe of Northern California that allows tribal members to conduct cultural burning on their land without oversight from the state. Reached back in February, this agreement comes after years of lawmaking and decades of advocacy, and is being seen as a blueprint for agreements across the state. Don Hankins is a professor in the Geography and Environmental Studies Department at Cal State Chico. He's a Plains Miwok cultural practitioner and has been stewarding the land with fire his entire life. He's a co-leader of the Indigenous Stewardship Network and has been involved with fire policy making for decades. I sat down with him last week to learn how Indigenous stewardship plays a role in the future of fire management here in the state, and how he thinks about a future where these megafires are predicted to become even more common. But I began by just trying to understand some basic terms. What exactly is cultural burning? It's my understanding that Indigenous cultural burning is much more than just fuels management, correct?
Right.
If you could help me understand those differences, that'd be great.
So there are a lot of differences between, say, prescribed fire and cultural burning, or as I like to refer to it as Indigenous fire stewardship, depending on the term that you like to use there. Indigenous fire stewardship is very unique in that it's based on traditional law. Those laws are based on an understanding of the responsibilities that are handed down from the time of creation through traditional stories, and mandate that people are stewarding the landscape that we live on. That stewardship occurs for a variety of different objectives and outcomes that come from the type of burning that's occurring. So rather than simply looking at the situation around fire as just a fuels problem, there's a lot more complexity to it. It's looking at things and saying, oh, well, this patch over here that we go and collect berries from is becoming less productive. So maybe we need to go and burn that. It might also be linked to spiritual connections to the landscape. Maybe it's part of a ceremony, and that fire might be applied to the landscape to clear an area maybe of negative spiritual energy. And sometimes it's part of an annual tradition that some areas are just repeatedly burned to maintain a certain condition in that place. Fire is also used to enhance, say, the flows of streams, to cool the temperature of the air, and also to cool water temperature, say maybe for protection of fisheries when the summer temperatures of the rivers get too high. And it's also used in terms of maybe fumigating the forest. For instance, applying fire under an inversion allows for that smoke to build up, and then that inversion pushes the smoke down into the canopy of the trees and helps to fumigate the trees from pests like weevils and things like that might impact, say, crops of acorns as an example. These are just some of the ways that, and many reasons why fire is applied to the land. But in order to be able to do so, it's not just a matter of going out and, say, setting fire when you've got a match in your hand. It's a matter of having a very intimate relationship with the land, where you're not just coming in and setting fire and walking away and never returning to that spot, but you're having a constant cycle of coming into a space, seeing what that space needs, and applying fire at the right intervals to achieve the outcomes that you want to see from that space. And then coming back to make sure that the outcomes have been achieved. So as an example, I live in a mixed conifer forest. I have black oaks, I have ponderosa pines and other species in the forest that I live in. And I think to myself, okay, one of the objectives that I have for burning is to protect my house, but also I think about the general needs of habitat for species like band-tailed pigeons and quail and other species of wildlife. And from a climate perspective, I'm also thinking about how I can best achieve, say, a greater opportunity for carbon sequestration in the soil based on the time of when I'm burning. So what I mean by that is if I'm creating biochar within the landscape, that biochar helps to amend the soil. It helps to make that soil hold more water and be more productive. And that's long-term carbon storage that's occurring when we do that kind of burning. So it's really a full range that each of those places that I have visited has their own time and their own frequencies and species that are being stewarded from a cultural perspective, which is different than prescribed fire, which might be simply going out and creating black within the landscape, not really taking into full consideration the impacts that that fire is going to have on species other than reducing fuel.
Yeah. Thank you so much for fleshing that out and painting that image. Focusing a little bit more on a policy level, I'm curious, over the last few months, the first federally recognized tribe entered an agreement with the state for, I guess you would say it, more permissive cultural burning. Could you tell me a little bit more about that agreement as you understand it, and what, if any, future agreements might be forthcoming?
Right. That's a great point. So what you're referring to is Senate Bill 310. SB 310 was passed last year, so in 2024. And what SB 310 does is, one, helps to redefine, or I'll say refine the definition of cultural burning and cultural fire practitioners, and also creates a pathway for federally recognized tribes to be able to enter into agreements for co-management and co-stewardship and engaging in the stewardship of their ancestral places in those contracts with state agencies. So, for instance, if a tribe has, say, a state park or a wildlife area within their ancestral territories that they want to be stewarding, this gives the state the ability to contract directly with those tribes and to set up agreements to allow for that stewardship to occur, just as a state agency would be able to step in and do that work. So the first tribe that has developed this is the Karuk tribe, and then set an agreement with the Natural Resources Agency. And to my understanding, they were able to burn in the time that this law became effective in, I think, January. They were able to do some burning on about 300 acres of land within their ancestral territories in the Klamath River region. I'll just say one thing, and that is many of the tribes that are doing stewardship within the state are from non-recognized tribes. And so, this policy is, again, this kind of incremental step. It allows for federally recognized tribes to engage in this, but doesn't include the non-recognized tribes who may be also engaging in this space. And I bring that up not as a way to say that it was bad. It's certainly beneficial, but it's a matter of needing to continue to work through these things to make sure that the work is able to occur across the state, because the vast majority of tribes in the state are not federally recognized.
Gotcha. That actually could segue well into kind of a bit of a broader historical step back question that I had wanted to ask you, which is, there seems to be so much energy and enthusiasm for prescribed fire, for fuels management, cultural burning, all of these practices, and the need for more, better, good fire. But it's my understanding that quite recently was not the case, not at all. And I'm just curious if you could kind of help me understand I guess, go however far back you'd like to go. But understand that transition. I'd be very interested to hear.
Right. Well, so I mean, if we want to understand like what happened to fire as a process within our landscapes, one, I can say pretty succinctly that the impacts of colonization put a limit through policy and genocidal acts in the state to minimize the ability for Native peoples to be able to burn. And then following on that is fire suppression policy coming into play in the early 1900s. And while that policy was in place, there were places where within the state, members of community, mostly within the ranching community, were still actively engaging in fire for rangeland improvement and those sorts of things. And so those practices really, while not happening necessarily in the forests because of the fire suppression policy, were definitely still happening in, say, grassland and oak woodland and chaparral communities up until probably the early to late 1980s, depending on where within the state you're at. And so, there's different programs that existed that, like CAL FIRE had. One of those programs was called the Chaparral Plan, which ultimately evolved into being the Vegetation Management Program, which now, allows for CAL FIRE to work with landowners to implement and plan burns on private lands, in different areas of state and elsewhere, also on state lands too. But these policy iterations kind of track this ability for fire to exist within the landscape. But then, one of the things that happened in probably the early 2000s was that this shift in risk really became much more of an issue. So in the state of California, we had a market for insurance that people who engaged in prescribed fire and other forms of land stewardship might apply for if they felt necessary for the work that they were doing. And because of the kind of risk aversion that existed within the insurance market, those opportunities left. And so, meaning that there was no ability to get insurance for that sort of thing. And so a lot of people were not willing to take the personal risk of, even though it's the right thing to do, and we know that prescribed fires and cultural fires have a very low chance of escape. We're talking like 0.01, in some cases, like they're very safe to do. But, like if you don't have the ability to, say, get insurance to protect yourself for that very slim chance that something goes wrong, then some people are not going to, engage in the burning. So that actually led to a $20 million fund within the state to provide a sort of pilot program that provides a limited amount of insurability for practitioners who apply to that fund to have their burns covered. So kind of a long convoluted story, but this is a sort of thing that allows for the ability for fire to start to be put back into the landscape again. It's a matter of how we perceive the risk, but then also recognizing that the risk is not to burn at all. So that's the kind of thing that I think as a society we need to grapple with and recognize that fire does have a place within the landscape, and that its exclusion is really the problem, right?
Yeah. Okay. I think you're actually getting to the heart of the matter here that I was so curious about, which is if the data bears out that the risk of escaped fire is so low and the benefits are so clear and have been known for so long, I guess. And yeah, this is my question. It's and apologies if it feels a little bit obvious, but how did we get it so wrong? Maybe only now fully comprehending the consequences of inaction as well.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpackage around that, to be honest. I would say one, when we look at that early history of fire exclusion by removing Native people's abilities to burn, that came at a major cost that was one based off of a fear of and protection of crops that were being grown by early Spanish settlers in the state, mostly associated with emissions. But there's a whole ecological change that begins to happen at that time too, right? So like there's this major shift that's occurring because we now have these invasive plants that are present, and in the absence of, and sometimes even in the presence of fire, they're spreading in the landscape. And that actually comes back to, like what is spreading these fires as a problem in Southern California, as we started a conversation with, is mostly these non-native annual grasses, right? So, like understanding that ecology is really critical to how we steward fire. And I would say that largely, while there were some that recognized the benefits of burning in the early days of fire suppression, from both the state and federal levels, the real opposition was always about the impacts to crops, right? So think about the forest, it's a crop. When we think about the agricultural products that the missions were trying to protect, it's that crop value and damage that they were concerned with, rather than the healthy ecological system that is fire maintained. I don't know if I answered what you were getting to entirely there, but that's kind of like the beginning of the understanding for it, I think.
No, thank you very much. Absolutely. I want to ask for your response to, I guess you would call it maybe a bit more of a provocative claim that I've seen in some places, but basically that says that given a lot of this history that the forests have been mismanaged for so long, that climate change is happening too fast, that too much has been built in areas that we know will burn, that essentially, I guess we're screwed. Like the firefighting techniques that we have cannot fully work, and that scenarios like the fires in Los Angeles, Lahaina, Paradise will just become more frequent. Yeah, I guess I'm curious what your response to that line of thinking would be.
Right. That's a great question. I think what you said is, this point of, well, things are changing so rapidly and we can't win against this. And I just think, look, we have to do something because there is no fire alternative, right? Meaning fire is going to be part of this landscape, whether we like it or not. We have to learn to live with fire. And we should be using fire and allowing for fire in ways that minimize the adverse impacts that could occur because of it being there. So can we use fire in a way that minimizes the amount of structures that are lost? Can we use fire in a way that minimizes the both mental and physical health impacts from the fires, meaning like smoke impacts and, the psychological impacts of losing a community? Like there's so many of those layers that we need to understand. But I would say this, that, when we look at climate change, which has happened all along, Indigenous peoples have always used fire within the landscapes to protect the same kinds of things that we still value today in our communities, protecting our homes, protecting livelihoods, protecting our waterways, all of those things. And, thinking about like our biodiversity, like all of that requires fire in this place. And while our climate is changing rapidly, we need to be applying fire at the right times in the right places under the conditions that we can best achieve the outcomes that we want as a society and are ecologically and culturally aligned.
Don Hankins is a professor of geography and environmental studies at Cal State Chico and a Plains Miwok cultural practitioner. When we come back, we listen to an absolutely beautiful and haunting piece about the Santa Ana winds, and then speak to Rebecca Nolan, the piece's creator.
The point of the piece and the point of these big events is we need to take a step back and realize that this is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship that we have with nature and with the planet. And currently, it's a very parasitic relationship. And it is kind of hard to not see these events as nature trying to get our attention and reminding us that ultimately we're not in control.
Stay with us. Hey, it's still me, Eli. Just wanted to let you know that Radio Pacific is fully independent local media based right here in the Bay Area. If you like what you're hearing, the biggest way you can support us is to send this episode to a few friends and to subscribe to and rate this podcast feed. Seriously, those two things make a huge difference. So thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the show.
You're tuned in to Radio Pacific from KALW in San Francisco, California.
Welcome back to Radio Pacific. I'm Eli Cohen. There is something uneasy in the Los Angeles air this afternoon. Some unnatural stillness, some tension. Joan Didion wrote in August 1967 in the Saturday Evening Post. Easterners commonly complain, she adds, that there is no weather at all in Southern California, that the days and seasons slip by relentlessly, numbingly bland. That is quite misleading. In fact, the climate is characterized by infrequent but violent extremes. Torrential subtropical rains which wash out the hills and send subdivisions sliding toward the sea, and the Santa Ana, which, with its incendiary dryness, invariably means fire. Well, that is all held true, except for the infrequent part. In the intervening decades, California has only gotten hotter, fire season has only gotten longer, and millions more people have moved into areas known to burn. We've moved mountains and rivers, quite literally, to achieve this, believing we can control the natural world. To my knowledge, no one has yet claimed we can control the wind, and after this year, I hope none will try. The city burning is Los Angeles's deepest image of itself, Didion concludes. It is the weather of catastrophe, of apocalypse. The wind shows us how close to the edge we are. Rebecca Nolan is a documentarian and sound designer living in Newfoundland, Canada. She was born, however, in Morro Bay, a small fishing town on California's central coast, some 4 hours north of Los Angeles. Morro Bay, like LA, like much of California, is wedged up against the sea by rugged coastal mountains. Morro Bays are called the Nine Sisters, a chain of volcanic peaks, one of which sits in the bay itself, a 580-foot-tall lava plug towering out of the water. Morro Bay also has the winds. The winds have different names depending on where you live. In the Bay Area, they're often called the Devil Winds, a name conjured after the 1991 Oakland firestorms because the wind came from inland, down the slopes of Mount Diablo. In Santa Barbara, they're called the Sundowner Winds because they frequently pick up at dusk. But growing up, Rebecca knew them as the Santa Ana. In 2023, she made a short audio piece as a tribute to the winds, to the way it influenced her upbringing and her community, and to the doubts it forced her to grapple with from the very beginning, and is still grappling with today. We discuss it all after the piece. This is the Santa Ana Winds.
Before they start, like the day before they start, the whole world is still. And when I was little, I noticed that those still days were days that the butterflies wouldn't all come out.
And there were always monarchs, so there was bright orange wings against the blue sky.
So I started calling them butterfly days.
And I remember sitting there when I was a kid blowing bubbles. Because the air was so still, the bubbles wouldn't move. They just kind of float there like they were frozen in time.
It was kind of still and quiet. It was like the earth was waiting to take a breath.
That was earthquake weather, when the air feels thick and heavy. It feels like if something doesn't happen, that the earth would start vibrating.
They feel like the phrase, something wicked this way comes.
And everyone feels it. And it's like they know something's coming.
There's something dry about them.
Not much rainfall happening in drought years, if any.
It's hard to explain the drought to people unless they lived in it.
Everything's dead. If it's not dead, it's honestly surprising.
I live in a city now. I always have water. I don't have to think about where it comes from. The grass is green. But when the Santa Ana winds kick up, there is a physical confrontation with dryness and drought that is unusual and troubling.
They don't blow around you, they blow through you. If that makes any sense. And they think that's why they feel different.
I don't know. When I was a little kid, I thought that they were scary.
It just seemed like it was that restless unhappiness that you see or you feel in haunted houses.
It always just felt like the veil between the worlds was thinner when the winds were there.
Oh, I have this very clear sense memory of these tall birch trees that were outside my childhood bedroom, and when the Santa Ana wind came, it would run through the leaves and it would sound like skittering, like insects almost, like a dry skittering across the ground.
It's looking for something, it's seeking something, and not quite sure what it is.
That hollow, kind of sick feeling.
Like there were ghosts in the air.
Like a lost spirit, you're right. Yeah. And then they came, it was kind of like this screaming.
It was like impossible to go outside after 1 PM because the winds were so strong.
They blew so hard. I think I was a toddler and remembering it was hard to stay up.
It's like it wasn't air anymore. It had left its elemental state of air and turned into something bigger and stronger and different and scary.
Physical. It was a solid feeling.
They're very strong. They can uproot trees, and you lose a lot of branches and parts of the tops of your house.
Can't talk about Santa Ana winds without talking about everything that it lifts from the earth into the air.
When I was little, I thought they were wonderful because I thought I could fly.
I think we all used to think that when we were younger, that we could just fly away with the wind.
I tried taking an umbrella and having the umbrella lift me up like in Mary Poppins. But that didn't work. I tried putting on this cape thing that I used to have and go really fast and wave my arms, but that didn't work.
When the Santa Ana winds blew in, it was like the normal rules of the world didn't apply anymore.
The Santa Ana winds were always kind of devastating.
I've heard them called devil winds.
It's just like it seems to spark fires.
Like there's something quite hellish about them.
The whole sky was orange. The sun was looking so crazy.
When the Santa Ana winds are paired with fire, which is more and more frequent, it becomes impossible to put out the fire.
It feeds the fire by oxygenating it. It blows up like ashes and embers.
There's ash in the air, and the ash falls like snow.
Ash falling from the sky is not a very uncommon thing here. Nobody's really fazed by it anymore.
You can drive through and see the scars that the fire has left. You know, the land is all blackened and there's just skeletons of trees and they're all charred. But now, because of, the drought, we don't really have a fire season anymore because the fire season is constant, and we don't really have the, Santa Ana wind season.
I seem to remember in our childhood they would come once or twice a year. And now I feel like we're getting these kinds of winds once every 3 months or so.
There's a loss of that, cycles that we always could count on.
Dryness turning into something that physical instead of something that can be ignored, especially for people who live in cities. That can be really startling. And maybe that's a good thing because it reminds us that, moisture is not a given.
It's almost like the earth is trying very hard to get our attention.
There's something not of this world attached to the Santa Ana winds, and I don't think it's an inherently positive thing.
So who knows? Maybe the spirits of our ancestors are, in the wind and they're trying to communicate with us. I think what they're trying to say is pay attention.
I remember walking across charred, burnt hills, and it makes this sound when you walk through it, this lightest little as you're breaking through the crust of charcoal. And everything is silent.
Hey, okay, one more thing. We do have a newsletter. I know everyone has a newsletter, just like everyone has a podcast. This one is very low-key. Comes out just once a month, along with each new episode. Gives a little more info and context about that month's topic, previews of what's to come, and general updates on the show. Not spam, good stuff. You can sign up on our website, radiopacific.co.
You're tuned to KALW 91.7 FM. This is Radio Pacific.
Welcome back. I'm Eli Cohen. This is Radio Pacific. We just heard Santa Ana Winds by documentarian and sound designer Rebecca Nolan. I called Rebecca in Newfoundland, where she now lives. We discussed her piece, her complicated feelings about the Santa Ana, and how journalists should approach a topic as incomprehensible as climate change. Well, I just want to start with a little bit about you. You grew up in California, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in a tiny town that I used to call a small fishing village until I moved to Newfoundland and was told that 10,000 people was not a small fishing village and I needed to shut up. But it's a small fishing village called Morro Bay, but it's near San Luis Obispo, so halfway between LA and San Francisco on the coast.
Yeah, I've been to Morro Bay a few times. You've got that big rock.
Yeah, love that rock. She's good.
What was it like growing up there? I guess specifically in terms of your experience with the wind.
In terms of the winds, I can't remember the first time I ever remember like feeling them. They were just kind of always there in the background. But when I was little, they would blow in like 3 or 4 times a year, always in the fall, around October, around kind of like the Halloween season. And I just remember them being like this magical kind of thing where it would feel like kind of overnight the world would get turned upside down. I don't know. It felt, I'm going to be like weird. It felt like, you know, when you walk outside on a full moon and you have that kind of magical, surreal moonbeam feeling. It felt like that, or like dusk or dawn, where everything is just like familiar but slightly off.
Interesting. Yeah. So what's the first indication that the winds have arrived?
So there's the before where everything's still. And then I always remember them picking up at night, but it's not a slow build. It feels like it's all or nothing. It's like still, and then all of a sudden the air is hard and warm and hot and moving everything around. And it's just like almost walking on a boat through water where it's just like you can't keep yourself quite upright. At least when you're a kid. When you're a kid, the wind is just like such a formidable force because you're so small. And
how long would they typically last for?
I remember them only being a day or two. It would usually be like maybe 3 days would be like a long amount of them. But I know that now they come and they last much longer. I know it can be weeks sometimes. But I remember it being usually 3 days. And then it would kind of sort of taper off. And that's when you'd get like the magic waves, the offshore with like the veils going behind it, like wind pushing onto the water to those like really good surfing waves.
I feel like surfers never let a good catastrophe go to waste. Like the hurricane surfers, you know, the hurricanes coming in, they're out there with their boards.
Or what was it? There was like a tsunami warning in Hawaii when like the Japanese earthquake happened and everyone was there with their surfboards and we were watching on the news being like, I mean, I guess that makes sense for them, but I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, totally. Well, I want to circle back in a second to kind of dryness and fire. But before that, I was wondering if I could ask you specifically about your piece.
Yeah.
What inspired it? And really, I'm most curious about the format. What inspired the format?
Yeah. So it started, I was taking a course and we our assignment that week was to make a kaleidoscope piece. So examining a thing from a bunch of different angles and a bunch of different voices. And I was really homesick, but it was, my mom called because, this is kind of morbid, she thought my childhood dog was going to die that day. And so we were trying to like FaceTime to talk to the dog. And I was like saying my goodbyes and everything. And then the dog continued to live for months afterwards. And then she's like, oh, it was just the winds. The winds bring death. So I thought she was going to die because she was acting weird because of the Santa Ana winds. And I was like, that's a weird thing to say. But you know what? It completely makes sense to me. But it wouldn't make sense to most people outside of California that just so associate them with change and things being off and death. And we can use them for excuses for things that I feel like anyone outside of California would think it was like too hippy-dippy. But saying it in California, you're like, oh yeah, totally. That was the Santa Ana winds. It's like Mercury's in retrograde, but for like weather.
So that phrase that your mom said to you sort of was the jumping off point?
Yeah. Because I was like, that's just so weird. Because I've been away long enough to be able to kind of like examine California-isms kind of from like an outsider lens a little bit and being like, yeah, that's not a normal thing to say, but it totally makes sense. I need to dig into that. And then it also was making me think about the winds and how much I missed them. And it's honestly one of the things that I missed the most about California is the Santa Ana winds, which I know is crazy considering how destructive and powerful and horrible they can be.
I mean, that's reflected in your piece itself. You've got a couple of different voices, and you can sort of piece together over the course of the 10 minutes that the folks feel pretty differently about the winds. I'm curious if you could kind of explain why you wanted to include that contradiction, and then where you personally fall on how you feel about the winds.
Yeah. Well, I think the winds kind of are a contradiction. Like, wind is supposed to be cold, but these are hot. Wind is supposed to be refreshing, but these are suffocating. The Santa Ana winds are a contradiction in themselves. And then also the way that we feel about them. Like, when you're talking about the Santa Ana winds in the grocery store with everyone else, like, it's a love-hate relationship, right? Like, we like it because it's ours, and it's because it's our weather, and it's something that we can relate to and is specifically California. Like, I know there are other, like, warm winds and whatever, but, like, the Santa Anas are like the Santa Anas. They're ours. But it's also, like, we know that anything can happen in terms of, like, danger and fire and drought. And so it's really kind of like infinite possibility, teetering on the edge between magic and destruction kind of thing. And I really like that place, that, like, tension there.
Could you just tell me who are the voices, the different voices in the piece?
Yeah. So the people that you're hearing in the piece are my mom, my sister, my cousin, and me. I added myself so I could add the woo-woo stuff in.
Great. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I want you to confront this idea for me. I know in climate journalism or science journalism, there's often a bit of a fear almost, or a real resistance to anthropomorphizing, right? You got to stay analytical within the bounds of the science. Your piece very boldly goes in the opposite direction, especially by the end, kind of giving a real voice to the winds themselves. I'm curious why you made that choice and what you think about that idea of maybe having to resist that in science communication more generally.
Yeah. Well, I think I did that personally because that's just how I view the winds. I do, in my hippy-dippy Californianess, view them kind of as the ancestors. It's like they feel like they're full of death, and death is people who have passed on. So it would make sense that they would have a voice. And also, if you listen to it, the door at my mom's house, my childhood house, is very uninsulated. Like, there's a giant gap around the bottom. And when the winds come, you hear it in the piece. I wove it throughout the whole thing. It sounds like screaming. Like, there sounds like a ghost going, ooh. And so I grew up with that sound always in the background whenever the winds came. And so It sounded like there was a real voice. It sounded like there was a real ghost.
Wow. That recording in the piece is of your home. That's not just some.
There's a lot of different wind in there, so not all of it is. But the one that's most consistently sounding like a kind of like a voice, that one is 100% under I was like at the bottom of my mom's door with a microphone recording.
Wow.
So that's why I did it that way. Mm-hmm. And in terms of, so I have the problem that I think a lot of other people do when it comes to climate change journalism. It is so big and so terrifying that you just turn it off. You can't engage with it because, like my heart's racing now talking about it, like thinking about the things that are happening to the planet, what I'm passing on to my children if I have children. It's scary, and I can't do anything about it. Like, really, like, genuinely. They say we can do stuff about it, but I don't really think an individual has that capability. We have to come together as a community and as, like, a world. But I think that leads to a lot of people just disengaging from climate reporting because it's always doom and gloom, and it's always too big. And so I think pivoting it into a way that is maybe more artistic or more emotional makes it easier, at least for me, to kind of receive the messages instead of just having statistics the whole time. And it's like giving yourself a spoonful of sugar with your medicine, where it's you giving yourself something also ideally beautiful to listen to and that you're engaged with and interested in what the people are saying. And then you also get these deeply personal accounts of climate change.
That makes complete sense to me. And I feel that in the piece. I mean, when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to talk about these recent fires, I was reading lots of different things, but nothing kind of stopped me in time. Like, it felt almost timeless in a way.
Thank you. That makes me feel so good.
Absolutely. Because but that actually reminded me, you made this a number of years ago, right?
Yeah, I made it for the class I was taking was 2023, I want to say, 2022, around there. Okay. Yeah, so I started making the piece in October, which would have been when the winds were like at their strongest. And that was also where the drought was at its height for that point. Like, California has been in and out of a drought for as long as I can remember, for as long as a lot of people my age can remember. Like, I can distinctly, I think I talked about the last time I remember there being like a lot of rain was like 2003. Yeah. That's a long time. And so I made it. And then when I finished it, I was putting the finishing touches on the piece, and it was January. And the drought ended that year. That was the year that we had a bunch of crazy rain, and it flooded. Like, my town flooded, which has never happened in my memory. People drowned. Roads got cut off. It was a state of emergency. Power went out. We were stuck in our houses for 2 or 3 days because of the water.
Wow.
And I was like, this piece is useless now. But then I was thinking about it, about like these unprecedented weather events that are just going to keep happening more and more. And I guess it is a reminder that climate change isn't like a one-size-fits-all thing. We're going to get extra rain. We're going to get extra snow. We're going to get mudslides. We're going to get like polar vortexes. It's not just drought. It's not just fire. Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's kind of poetic that we're as helpless against the water as we are against the fire and the wind.
I mean, and case in point, not 2 years later, we have these fires in Los Angeles. I'm curious, once you started seeing that news, if it made you think of this piece, or how this piece kind of resurfaced in light of that.
Yeah, it made me think about it a lot. I'm living in a Canadian bubble right now. So my fiance had to tell me that there were all these fires in LA. And then I look it up, and it was talking about the Santa Ana winds. And I was like, of course, that makes 100%, that makes sense. Just kind of that constant fear that you have in a lot of California, that you are just going to burn up, that your whole world can just go up in flames. And I don't know, it made me feel like a Californian, basically, like the pride of like, we can survive this, but also why do we have to survive this? Why is this becoming our normal? It shouldn't be our normal.
It's interesting you bring up what is normal, because the extremes only seem to be becoming more extreme with time and with the choices collectively that we're all making. Is the solution to leave? Is the solution to, for a lack of better phrasing, build back better? Does it only make it more imperative to do something about climate change? Yeah, what do you take away from events like this that are only becoming increasingly destructive and dramatic?
Yeah. I don't think the answer is to leave. I think humans might not be the best thing for the planet, but I also think that we are resilient. The point of the piece and the point of these big events is we need to take a step back and realize that this is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship that we have with nature and with the planet. And currently, it's a very parasitic relationship. We're taking a lot more than we're giving, and we're not thinking about that. And it is kind of hard to not see these events as nature trying to get our attention and reminding us that ultimately we're not in control, that it is in control. It's kind of morbid to say it, but the planet itself is going to be okay with or without us, and it probably will be okay more okay without us. I'm not sure I have a lot of hope right now in my life as is coming off in this. I want us to be able to do something. I want us to be able to have a call to action and really come to terms with this thing that we're facing. I don't know if we're going to do that, but I think that these events are kind of the planet screaming at us, saying that something has to be done. And if it's not, then it'll fix itself one way or another. And if that means getting rid of us, it will.
Somebody call 911. Fire burning. Let's go. Hey.
That's another hour of Radio Pacific. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again to our guests, Dawn Hankins and Rebecca Nolan. Composition and sound design once again done by the indefatigable Kirk Pearson and their merry band, Dogbotic Studios. This episode was edited by Ben Trefny. Special thanks again to Rob Byers for his help in teaching me how to mix audio. One more time, I'm Eli Cohen. This is Radio Pacific. See you in July.